The generals laughed. It wasn't cruel laughter, not exactly. It was the kind of dismissive chuckle reserved for rookies who didn't know the rules of the game, for idealists who dreamed too big. When Captain Victoria Phantom Blake requested assignment to a B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, the most advanced and expensive aircraft in the world, the Air Force brass exchanged smirks across the table. "Captain Blake," one general said, his tone dripping with paternal condescension, "the B-2 isn't a toy for ambitious fighter jocks. It requires years of bomber experience, and frankly, you don't have it." The others nodded. To them, Victoria was a skilled but unproven pilot, a young woman who had made her mark in F-16s but hadn't earned the right to step into the black bat-like shape of America's most feared bomber. 6 hours later, 12 enemy military bases were smoking craters, and those same generals realized exactly why the B-2 Spirit was built for pilots like her. Victoria Blake's journey to that moment didn't begin in a cockpit simulator or at the Air Force Academy. It began in the dry Nevada desert, on a ranch where the skies seemed endless and the horizon stretched like a challenge waiting to be answered. Her grandfather, Colonel Benjamin Sky King Blake, was a legend in his own right. A Cold War bomber pilot, he had flown B-52 Stratofortresses on missions where a single mistake meant annihilation. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had seen the world teeter on the edge of nuclear fire more than once, and had helped pull it back. To young Victoria, he wasn't just grandpa. He was her first instructor, her first mentor, her first commander. "Little aviator," he'd call her, strapping her into the seat of his modified Cessna 172 on weekend mornings. Any pilot can fly straight and level, but a bomber pilot, that's different. A bomber pilot carries the weight of nations. The Cessna wasn't a war machine, but in his hands it became a classroom of discipline and precision. He had outfitted it with advanced navigation equipment and flight computers, tools far beyond what civilian trainers normally carried. Under his watchful eye, Victoria learned not just how to fly, but how to think while flying. Her grandfather drilled into her the lessons that shaped her future. Mental toughness mattered more than bravado. Situational awareness was life itself. A single mission could change the course of history. He told her stories of combat missions over Vietnam, of flying through thunderstorms that grounded other squadrons, of using celestial navigation when electronics failed. He spoke of formation flights lasting 20 hours, where fatigue was an enemy as dangerous as missiles. From him, she learned that flying wasn't about stick and rudder skills alone. It was about strategic thinking, the ability to see the battlefield as a puzzle to be solved, no matter the cost. Victoria entered the Air Force at 22, fresh out of the University of Nevada with a degree in aerospace engineering. Unlike many cadets, she understood the machines she flew not just as instruments of war, but as marvels of design. Every switch, every system, every quirk of aerodynamics, she analyzed them with an engineer's eye and a warrior's hunger. At flight school, her instructors quickly realized she wasn't just good. She was different. During bombing exercises, her scores were flawless. In multi-aircraft operations, she never lost situational awareness, no matter how chaotic the skies became. When stress levels peaked, when alarms blared and other pilots froze, Victoria adapted. Her defining moment came during her second deployment to Syria. Flying an F-16 on a night mission, she executed a series of strikes so precise that enemy forces never saw her coming. She appeared on radar for seconds, unleashed devastating firepower, and vanished into the dark. From that night on, her squadron called her Phantom. By the time she was 29, she had flown 247 combat missions, close air support, precision bombing, strategic strikes. Her record was flawless. 0 mission failures, 0 aircraft losses. But to the Air Force generals, none of that mattered. She was still a fighter pilot, and in their eyes, bomber pilots were something else entirely. General Marcus Iron Eagle Crawford embodied that mindset. A veteran of 30 years, he had flown bombers when the Cold War was at its peak, and his worldview had been forged in those tense decades. Tradition, procedure, experience. Those were the pillars of his command. To him, bombers were sacred tools of strategy, and only the most seasoned aviators deserved to wield them. Women had begun to carve their place in fighters, sure, but bombers? In Crawford's eyes, that was still unproven ground. So when Captain Victoria Blake requested assignment to a B-2 Spirit, Crawford didn't hesitate. Denied, he said flatly. His reasoning was simple. She lacked bomber experience, but tradition was about to clash with necessity. Intelligence analysts brought grim news. Enemy forces had constructed 12 fortified military bases across a strategic region. Together they formed a defensive network strong enough to strangle shipping lanes, disrupt communications, and threaten entire Allied populations. Each base was armed with cutting-edge air defenses, SAM batteries, underground bunkers, overlapping radar networks. Conventional bombing runs would mean catastrophic losses. Ground assaults would be suicide. There was only one solution. A B-2 Spirit stealth bomber penetrating the network, striking all 12 targets with surgical precision before the enemy could react. It was the most dangerous mission in decades, and to succeed it required a pilot who could think beyond doctrine. Victoria raised her hand. "I can do it," she said. The room fell silent. Generals shifted uncomfortably. Crawford's eyes narrowed. "This mission requires experience you do not have, Captain," he said coldly. "We'll assign Colonel Anderson. He's our most seasoned B-2 pilot." Victoria didn't flinch. Instead, she laid out a tactical analysis, flight paths, timing calculations, adaptive maneuvers that revealed an understanding of the B-2 Spirit that went beyond training manuals. She explained how her background in aerospace engineering gave her an edge, how her time in F-16s had sharpened her instincts for fast, complex decision-making. "Sir," she said evenly, "experience matters. But in this mission, innovation matters more. If you send someone who only knows the old ways, this mission fails. If you send me, we succeed." The intelligence officer interrupted with urgency. "General, enemy defenses are tightening. Our window for success is closing." Crawford looked at her long and hard. The decision weighed heavy. Tradition told him no. Necessity whispered yes. Finally he said, "Captain Blake, if you fail, 12 enemy bases remain operational and the region collapses. If you succeed," he exhaled, "you will have executed the most complex bombing mission in Air Force history." Victoria's green eyes burned with resolve. "I understand the stakes, sir. I won't fail." The Spirit of Washington sat on the tarmac like a shadow carved into steel, its sleek black wings glistening under the floodlights. To most, it looked alien, an aircraft designed not for flight but for invisibility, for slipping through the cracks of radar and emerging only to deliver devastation. Victoria stood before it in silence, her helmet tucked under one arm. She had flown fighters her entire career, but nothing compared to the B-2 Spirit. The aircraft didn't just fly, it hunted. Yet even now she could still hear the laughter from that briefing room echoing in her mind. Generals shaking their heads, dismissing her as a rookie in bomber operations. Crawford's cold eyes warning her she didn't have the experience. They were wrong. She wasn't just ready. She was destined. The mission briefing had been brutal in its clarity. On the screen glowed satellite images of 12 enemy installations, each circled in red. "These," the intelligence officer said, "are the backbone of the enemy's strategic command. Destroy them and the network collapses. Fail and the region falls under their control." He clicked through the slides. Each base was a fortress. Hardened bunkers, SAM batteries, anti-aircraft artillery, radar grids, underground storage facilities. The bases were positioned to cover one another, overlapping in mutual defense. Traditional doctrine would require a massive bombing campaign, dozens of aircraft, and likely thousands of casualties. But the Air Force didn't have the luxury of time or blood. There is only one aircraft that can do this, the officer concluded. The B-2 Spirit. General Crawford had taken the floor then, his voice booming with authority. This mission requires the most experienced B-2 pilot we have, he declared. Colonel Anderson. Victoria sat at the far end of the table, her hands folded, her green eyes fixed on the map. She had studied every angle, every flight corridor, every defensive position. She had already solved the puzzle in her head before Crawford finished his sentence. "Sir," she said quietly but firmly, "with respect, Anderson won't succeed." The room fell silent. Heads turned. Crawford glared at her. "And why is that, Captain?" Victoria rose, sliding a data pad across the table. Numbers, calculations, flight paths, all precise, all brutally logical. "Because Colonel Anderson will fly by the book," she explained. "He'll rely on doctrine. Doctrine that the enemy has studied for years. They've built these bases specifically to counter our conventional approaches. What they haven't prepared for." She paused, locking eyes with the general. "Is someone who thinks differently." Crawford's jaw tightened. "Captain Blake, this isn't about creativity. This is about strategic bombing. It requires discipline, years of training, and the ability to command one of the most complex aircraft in existence. You've never flown a B-2 in combat." "I've studied its systems," she countered. "I understand its principles, and more importantly, I understand how to adapt. My engineering background allows me to see solutions others miss. The B-2 doesn't need someone who knows every switch by rote. It needs someone who knows how to bend it to the mission." Another general leaned forward. "Captain, do you really believe you can outfly Colonel Anderson?" "This mission isn't about outflying anyone," Victoria said. Her voice was steady, calm. "It's about outthinking the enemy. And I can," the intelligence officer cut in. His voice was urgent. "Sir, enemy defenses are accelerating. They're moving more SAM batteries into position, reinforcing command bunkers. If we don't strike within the next 12 hours, we lose the window entirely." All eyes turned back to Crawford. The weight of command pressed on his shoulders. Tradition screamed at him to stick with Anderson. But logic whispered that Blake was right. If she failed, 12 bases would remain operational. The region would fall into chaos. If she succeeded. Crawford exhaled slowly. His voice was low, grudging, but final. "Captain Blake, the mission is yours." The hangar buzzed with activity as ground crews prepared the Spirit of Washington for departure. Fuel trucks hissed. Weapons teams loaded precision-guided munitions, and technicians ran final diagnostics on the stealth systems. Victoria climbed the ladder into the cockpit, running her hands along the cool composite skin of the bomber as if absorbing its strength. Inside, the B-2 was unlike anything she had flown before. The cockpit was a symphony of digital displays, navigation panels, and weapons systems. She strapped herself in, her hands moving across controls she had studied for months. The layout was different from her F-16, but the principles were the same. Lift, thrust, stealth, firepower. The language of aviation was universal. She closed her eyes for a moment, remembering her grandfather's words. "Little aviator, sometimes one mission changes the course of history." Tonight was that mission. Control crackled in her headset. "Spirit 1, this is command. You are cleared for Operation Phantom Strike. Weather optimal. Defensive intelligence current. Godspeed." Victoria's hands tightened on the controls. Copy command. Spirit 1 rolling. The runway lights blurred past as the B-2 surged forward. The engines roared, the nose lifted, and the Spirit of Washington rose into the night sky. She was alone now. No wingman, no squadron, just her, the machine, and 12 targets waiting in the dark. Victoria's heart pounded, but her voice was calm as she whispered to herself, "They laughed. They won't laugh again." The world below was cloaked in silence. From 50,000 feet, the desert terrain looked like a sleeping beast, jagged ridge lines cutting shadows across the earth. To most pilots, this kind of night flight was unnerving. To Victoria Blake, it was where she belonged. The cockpit of the B-2 Spirit glowed with dim green light. Navigation screens whispered data, systems hummed quietly, and her oxygen mask hissed in rhythm with her steady breathing. To anyone else, it would feel like isolation. To her, it was focus. She wasn't just flying into enemy territory, she was flying into the heart of impossibility. 12 fortified bases, each designed to repel an entire squadron, each linked into a defensive network that shared radar, anti-aircraft fire, and missile systems. And she was one bomber. Alone. Enemy radar arrays scanned the skies relentlessly, searching for intruders. Victoria knew them well, their sweep patterns, their blind spots. She had studied every line of intelligence, memorized the rhythm of their rotations like a musician memorizes notes. She angled the Spirit low, hugging the contours of the earth, sliding between radar beams. The stealth systems purred, scattering signals into the void. To the enemy, the skies were empty. Her first target appeared on the screen, a command and control bunker buried beneath reinforced concrete, coordinating all 12 installations. If she silenced that brain, the rest of the network would stagger in confusion. Victoria adjusted her flight path. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. She whispered to herself, "For you, Grandpa. For every lesson." She released 2 precision-guided bombs. They sliced through the night like silent daggers, slamming into the bunker with pinpoint accuracy. On her screen, the target disappeared in a flash of heat, signatures. The command hub was gone. "First one down," she murmured. 11 to go. The second and third bases came quickly, a radar station and a missile battery hidden in the desert hills. Her bombs struck before alarms could even sound. But the fourth target was different. As she lined up the run, her instruments flared red. Enemy SAMs had detected her. Missiles launched, white-hot trails screaming into the sky. Victoria's heart pounded, but she didn't panic. Her F-16 instincts kicked in. She threw the bomber into an aggressive maneuver most pilots would never attempt in a B-2. The Spirit groaned under the stress, but it obeyed. The missiles streaked past harmlessly, detonating in the empty night. "Not tonight," she whispered. She realigned, dropped her payload, and obliterated the missile site in a thunderous strike. By now, the enemy knew something was wrong. Their bases scrambled, defenses tightening, commanders shouting into broken comms. But they couldn't see her. She was a phantom. Victoria adapted her tactics on the fly. Instead of approaching targets directly, she looped wide, using mountains to shield her path. She varied her timing, never giving the defenses a rhythm to anticipate. Targets 5 through 8 fell in rapid succession: munitions depots, artillery positions, and underground fuel cache. Each explosion rippled across the desert, lighting up the horizon like distant suns. But with every strike, the danger grew. The enemy began deploying interceptors. Fast jets scrambled from hidden airfields, their afterburners glowing like predators in the dark. Victoria's radar warning receiver screamed as 2 enemy fighters locked onto her. She couldn't outmaneuver them in a dogfight. The B-2 wasn't built for that. But she could outthink them. She dropped altitude, hugging the earth so close her instruments howled warnings. The interceptors overshot, their radar losing her in the ground clutter. She banked hard, coming up behind them. The Spirit wasn't armed for air-to-air combat, but Victoria didn't need missiles. She used their momentum against them, leading them straight into the kill zone of her 9th target, an enemy base bristling with its own SAMs. The interceptors had no idea. As they pursued her, their own allies fired. A storm of missiles filled the sky, and in seconds both fighters were gone, destroyed by friendly fire. Victoria pulled away, her lips curling into the faintest smile. That's 9. The last 4 bases were the most heavily defended, fortresses armed with overlapping radar, SAM networks, and hardened bunkers. The 11th target was a nightmare, the most fortified installation in the entire network. SAMs launched in waves, the sky alive with deadly fire. Victoria pushed the Spirit beyond its design limits, weaving between missiles, using stealth not just as technology but as a weapon of timing, of precision. She adjusted release points mid-run, recalculated trajectories in seconds. Her bombs struck home, tearing through reinforced bunkers. The base vanished in fire and smoke. One left. The 12th and final installation loomed ahead, the core weapons depot. If she destroyed it, the entire network would collapse. Every defense left was pointed at her. Radar beams converged, dozens of missiles launched simultaneously. Victoria took a breath. The moment slowed. She remembered her grandfather's words. Sometimes one mission changes history. She dove straight into the firestorm. The Spirit shuddered as explosions rippled nearby. She juked, twisted, skimmed the edge of destruction. Warnings screamed across her cockpit, but her hands never wavered. At the last second, she released her payload. The bomb slammed into the depot. The desert erupted in a chain of fire that lit the sky brighter than dawn. Her screens confirmed, all 12 targets eliminated. For a moment, she said nothing, just silence, her breathing steady in the dark. Then she pressed her comm. Control, this is Spirit 1. All 12 targets eliminated. Network neutralization complete. Returning to base. On the other end, silence. For nearly a full minute, the command center couldn't believe it. Finally, a voice crackled through, awe trembling in the words. Spirit 1, confirm. All targets destroyed? Victoria's voice was calm, steady, certain. Confirmed. Mission accomplished. General Crawford, listening from command, closed his eyes. He had doubted her, dismissed her, laughed at her. Now, with 12 enemy bases reduced to rubble, he whispered into the mic with humility he had never shown before. Spirit 1, Captain Blake. What you accomplished tonight has redefined everything we thought possible. Victoria allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction. They told me I wasn't ready, she said softly, but the enemy never saw me coming. The Spirit of Washington glided back toward friendly airspace, its black silhouette invisible against the dawn. Victoria sat in silence, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins, her eyes scanning the instruments. Her mission logs were clear. 12 out of 12 targets destroyed, the most fortified network in enemy territory, neutralized in a single night. But as the bomber crossed into safe skies, she let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The impossible was done. The runway lights at Whiteman Air Force Base stretched like a welcoming beacon. Ground crews were already assembled, standing in disciplined silence as the Spirit approached. The aircraft touched down with a whisper, its engines roaring softly as it rolled to a halt. When the canopy opened, Victoria stepped out to the floodlights, helmet in hand. Her uniform was soaked with sweat, her eyes bloodshot from hours of strain, but she carried herself with the calm of someone who had mastered the storm. The crews erupted into cheers. Mechanics, officers, technicians, every one of them knew what she had just done. But inside the command building, the reaction was quieter. General Crawford and the assembled brass stared at the live feed from the bomber's onboard cameras. One by one, they had watched as the enemy bases vanished in plumes of fire. The data was undeniable. 12 targets, 12 kills, 0 failures. Crawford removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and said nothing for a long time. The room waited. Finally, he spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of his own shattered certainty. "Gentlemen," he said slowly, "tonight we witnessed something unprecedented. Captain Blake has just executed the most complex bombing mission in the history of the United States Air Force." No one argued. No one laughed. The following week, Victoria stood on a stage at Andrews Air Force Base. Her green eyes scanned the crowd of officers, cadets, and foreign dignitaries. The Distinguished Flying Cross gleamed on her chest, freshly pinned by the Chief of Staff of the Air Force himself. The speech that followed echoed across history. "Captain Blake has proven that courage is not defined by tradition, nor innovation by rank. She has shown that adaptability, creativity, and resolve are as vital as experience. Tonight we honor her not just for what she destroyed, but for what she built, a new way forward." The crowd rose to its feet in thunderous applause. For once, even General Crawford was among those clapping. He did not smile. Crawford was not a man of smiles, but he nodded, a gesture of respect that meant more than words. What Victoria had done changed more than just the course of the war. It changed the very culture of the Air Force. For decades, bomber assignments had been locked behind walls of tradition. Only the most seasoned, the most orthodox pilots were allowed near the spirit. But now cadets at the academy studied Victoria's mission as a case study. In Siri training, instructors used her name as an example of thinking beyond doctrine. Fighter jocks whispered her call sign, Phantom, like a legend, proof that innovation could be more powerful than experience. Applications from women seeking bomber assignments tripled within a year. For the first time, the gatekeepers realized the gate no longer existed. General Crawford retired 2 years later. In his final speech, he spoke of 3 wars, dozens of missions, hundreds of decisions. But when asked what moment defined his career, he gave an answer no one expected. "It was the night a young captain proved me wrong," he said. "She showed me that tradition must never choke progress, and that sometimes the Air Force doesn't need a relic, it needs a phantom." Victoria Blake rose quickly through the ranks. Colonel, then Brigadier General. She never forgot the lessons of her grandfather, or the mission that had defined her career. She didn't chase glory. She trained it. At the Air War College, she stood before classes of young aviators, her voice steady, her presence commanding. "Listen carefully," she would tell them. "War is not won by those who follow the book. War is won by those who rewrite it. When you sit in that cockpit, it won't matter if you're male or female, veteran or rookie. What matters is this. Do you see the battlefield differently than the enemy? If you do, then you've already won." Her students never forgot those words. Some went on to fly F-35s, some B-21 Raiders, others drones and future craft not yet imagined. But all of them carried the same lesson. Adaptability was the true weapon. Years later, as the sun set over Nevada, Victoria visited her grandfather's grave. She placed her medals at the base of the headstone, the desert wind tugging at her auburn hair. "Mission accomplished, Grandpa," she whispered. "Just like you taught me." And as the stars filled the night sky, she looked up and smiled. Because somewhere above she knew Sky King was smiling too. Victoria Phantom Blake had become what few ever achieved. Not just a pilot, not just a commander, but a legend. And the world would never forget the night the Air Force laughed, until the Phantom silenced them all.